Thank you so much for that, Paul. And enormous thanks also to ESSA and UNHCR. We're very happy and proud to be partnering with you on this event today. So a few words about NORRAG. We are a global network that focuses on international policies for international cooperation in education and training. And we are celebrating our 45th birthday this year. And so we have a long history in focusing on the kinds of issues that we are discussing today, as well as others. And our current strategy focuses, as you'll see, on these 5 thematic areas. So this thematic area, the work that we're looking at today, falls into this education and the SDGs work, where we're really looking at how SDG 4, education and training, also intersects with other SDGs. In this case, one could say specifically in terms of employment in SDG 8, but we also know that education has deep and profound effects on all of the other SDGs. The other themes that we work on, very briefly, data and evidence, and our flagship project in the data and evidence theme is on missing education data. And we had an event in the UN Data Forum at the end of last year, where we focused on the missingness of internally displaced people and children, and the effects of that on education and training for those populations. We also look at questions of the types of data that might be missing. If we are focusing on beefing up national education, national statistical offices, what are the other types of data that are still extremely useful when thinking about education policy, planning and practice? And the final type of missing data that we look at there is really the missing purposes of data. So much of the data that is collected in country seems to be in a pipeline directly up to the global level for reporting and accountability, rather than being useful to national systems for the very people that it's meant to serve. Our third theme, innovations and disruptions. Here, our flagship project is the fact that we are host to the KICS Europe, Asia and Pacific region hub, and do a great deal of work there. You're very welcome to join the KICS EAP network. And that is working with 21 countries across the region, from Georgia to Papua New Guinea, and working to support local actors and local reforms, local innovations, to be able to work to improve education systems themselves in those countries. And we also have a project on the digitalization of education with the UN Special Rapporteur on the right to education. Our fourth theme, private sector approaches. Our flagship project there is on innovative financing for education. You will find 2 videos of a couple of events we did a couple of years ago coming soon on closing down a project that we've just finished. And also we have new project that's just starting up, where we're looking at what really is happening with these innovative financing approaches with impact bonds, impact investing, and how is that improving both the quantity and effectiveness of education, and affecting how that might work for financing more broadly. And our final theme is our network. You are very welcome, all of you, to join our network. You'll find the link on our website. You can see up here, you can log in or sign up, and Paul will also put it in the chat to make it easy for you to find as well. Everyone is welcome, and we're looking forward to our 45th year and making it a bumper year for the network. And as I said, we are thrilled to be working in partnership with ESSA and UNHCR on this event. All of our work is done in partnership. And I would like to now invite Lucy Heddy from ESSA to introduce her organization and the fantastic work that they do. Lucy.
Thanks so much, Moira, for that lovely introduction. My name is Lucy Heddy, and I'm the CEO of Education Sub Saharan Africa, or ESSA. ESSA is a small NGO based in Africa and the UK, working to connect data and evidence on education from Africa with those who have the power to improve the system, including educators, policymakers, and young people themselves. Our vision is one of high quality education in Sub-Saharan Africa that allows young people to fulfill their ambitions and strengthen society. Our mission starts with universities and colleges, using data and evidence to drive a dramatic improvement in outcomes for young people. We work across the student journey, looking at issues of access, quality, and transition to work. And we also support researchers working on education, leveraging the power of Africa's universities and colleges to improve outcomes for young people at all levels of education. Now, one of ESSA's first projects was looking at increasing access to tertiary education through scholarships. We mapped all scholarships available to young people in Sub-Saharan Africa and analysed them with respect to inclusion. Just 30% of these scholarships could be classified as inclusive. And even of those that were, hardly any actually tracked how many refugees, women, or other disadvantaged groups were in reality accessing financial support. And so it's been an extraordinary privilege to support UNHCR in its mission to increase the number of young refugees with access to a university or college education. Understanding pathways available for refugees to enter education is the first step to exploiting those opportunities to the fullest and advocating for further change. So thank you also to NORRAG for your partnership in hosting this event and raising the profile of this critical topic. And thank you to everyone joining here today. It's wonderful to see so many people here. I really hope that you enjoy the presentations today and that the evidence presented here inspires further action and collaboration. Thank you, and back to you, Moira.
Thank you, Lucy. And we are moving straight on to handing the floor to Ben Harvey, who is the Senior Resettlement and Complementary Pathways Officer at the Regional Bureau for West and Central Africa, who is going to set the scene for this report that was completed at the end of last year. Ben, over to you.
Thank you very much, Moira. Thank you, Lucy, as well, and a very warm welcome to you all from Dakar. Thanks for the introduction, Moira. Yes, indeed, I am the Senior Regional Resettlement and Complementary Pathways Officer. I'm heading up the Resettlement and Complementary Pathways unit here at the Bureau for West and Central Africa, which is the unit that commissioned this report from ESSA. A very big thank you to NORRAG, to the NORRAG network for providing this platform here today. I should also say a special thanks to Nabila, one of the refugee students who's very kindly agreed to take part. And of course, thanks to everyone at ESSA, not only for all the hard work that went into producing this report, but also for suggesting this webinar to present the findings of this report. So thanks to the colleagues for giving me an opportunity to say just a few words of background to this project. Before our ESSA colleague Latte begins with the presentation. So this project came about as a result of a series of discussions we had here at UNHCR's Regional Bureau around exploring the potential for third country solutions for refugees within our region. Our region offers both opportunities and challenges. It has one of the youngest populations in the world. There's a growing enrollment in primary, secondary, and tertiary education, and a rising per capita income as well. Yet, at the same time, it also remains a region which continues to experience precarious security situations and political and environmental instability, much of which is the cause of significant population displacement and movement. It's also noteworthy that the refugee population of West and Central Africa has doubled in the last 10 years. So for those of you unfamiliar with the term complementary pathways, which is the first two words in the title of the report, I'd like to just say a few words around that, because I think it's important that, that everybody understands the concept. So complementary pathways are safe and regulated avenues for refugees that provide a lawful stay in a third country where their international protection needs are met. They're considered, along with resettlement, as a third country solution, but they're also additional to resettlement. They're not a substitute for it. And this is why they're often referred to, or they're generally referred to, as complementary pathways. Now, resettlement, which I'm sure perhaps many of you will have heard more about, offers solutions to only a tiny proportion of the world's refugees. As of mid-2021, that amounted to somewhere in the region of 0.06% of the total refugee population. So it is fair to say that complementary pathways have an increasingly important role to play as a solution for the situation of refugees going forward. So the concept of complementary pathways is a relatively recent one, and it brings together a number of different third country solutions, many of which have existed separately for a long time, while others are more recent initiatives. They're all really quite diverse in nature and include initiatives like humanitarian visas, family reunification, education opportunities, and employment opportunities, among others. Complementary pathways offer the potential not only to ease pressure on refugee hosting states, but also to enhance refugee self-reliance and help them to attain a durable solution in the future. This is especially the case for skills-based pathways for admission, but equally for education opportunities, which of course is the focus of this report. Now, the Global Compact on Refugees, which was affirmed by the UN General Assembly in 2018, has a cornerstone, as one of its cornerstones, an imperative to expand access to third country solutions for refugees, both to enhance refugee self-reliance and also to relieve the pressure on hosting states. UNHCR's 3-year strategy on resettlement and complementary pathways, which runs from 2019 to 2021, set out a vision of an expansion of third country solutions so that by 2028, 3 million refugees would benefit from effective protection and solutions, 2 million of those through complementary pathways. The report presented here today focuses on complementary pathways through education opportunities. Whether it's in a vocational or an academic discipline, educational qualifications open doors to opportunities for refugees and can help contribute to both economy and society, whether this is in the country of asylum, the country of origin, or a third country. Educational opportunities for refugees within the West and Central Africa region are not new. The Daffy Tertiary Scholarship Programme, for example, has been in existence for 30 years now, offering students the possibility to earn an undergraduate degree in their country of asylum or as returnees in their home country. This report represents a mapping of those opportunities, which is the first step towards our longer term objective, which is really about exploring ways in which we can extend the provision and uptake of education opportunities for refugees from and within West and Central Africa. It offers an overview not only of what opportunities exist today and where, but also it goes as far as categorizing each country based on indicators for the potential to develop complementary pathways through education. But now I run the risk of straying into some of the areas that Latte is going to be presenting to you in just a moment. So I'm actually going to stop here. I'd like to thank you all once again for giving me this opportunity to provide a little bit of background, particularly on the point of complementary pathways, which I know has been the cause of some confusion. So thank you once again, and really looking forward to this presentation and to the discussions that will follow thereafter. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ben. And now we're going to pass over to Dr. Latte Lawson, who is the research manager for data at ESSA. He's an economist and data analyst with extensive policy-driven research experience, specialized in human development, sustainability, and geospatial and non-parametric modeling. Latte, over to you.
Thank you, Moira, for the introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. I am Latte Lawson, research manager at ESSA. So to present you our work on refugee education opportunities, let me quickly share my screen with you. The precise title of this report is Complementary Pathways Through Education for Refugees in the West and Central Africa region, mapping refugee education opportunities. So to present the report, let me quickly show you the overview of my presentation. After a brief introduction, I will discuss the main objective of this report. I will then show you the methodology we adopted, and then I will discuss the finding. Following the finding, I will give you an overall assessment of this report and gaps we identified, and I will draw some recommendations. So, introduction. As Ben introduced the refugee situation in Western and Central Africa, I will just add to that when we observe the number of the demographics of refugees in Western and Central Africa, the first observation you make is that the numbers are rapidly increasing. And over the last 2 decades, we observe in some countries more than 200% increase, and in countries like Chad, 800% increase in the refugee populations. So some question, follow the situation where a refugee population is becoming an urgency. So among this question, one can ask, how do refugees actually access social services such as education, the labor market, employment, or even health issues? So this work specifically focused on higher education and technical and vocational education and training. And the objective, as we agree upon it with the UNHCR, are the following. Firstly, it is for us to identify existing potential complementary education pathways for refugees within the region. Secondly, is to assess where there is a scope to further develop pre-existing pathways. And the third objective is to explore new education-based opportunities within the region for refugees. And finally, it is about identifying potential gaps and challenges refugees may face when assessing higher education opportunities. So to attain this objective, we adopt an approach at 3 steps. This 3-step methodological approach consists firstly in going through the scholarly knowledge to actually understand what do we know about refugee education. And secondly, we observe at the regional map level, in Western Africa and Central Africa, what do we know about the regional frameworks and refugee opportunities within the regions? And finally, we dive deep into each country to identify the provision of educational opportunities for refugees, the scholarship available to them, and the challenges people face, and the even Refugees Act and challenges people face to access higher education in the countries. Let me start then with the finding from the scholarly knowledge. Refugee education, why does it matter? From the perspective of Sustainable Development Goal, education, inclusive education is a goal for Sustainable Development Goal 4. And this also applies to marginalized groups, including refugees. So refugees' access to higher education is a matter of Sustainable Development Goal. Secondly, going to the existing literature, we observe that higher education play a crucial role in advancing refugees' integration into the whole society, in developing skill set that can be leveraged for entry into the labor market. Also, this applies to TVET. And regarding TVET, it is seen as a useful tool in promoting efficient access to secure decent job in the host countries. So also going to the literature, we identify—
Latte, forgive me for interrupting. I do apologize. We've had a few messages just saying, could you speak a bit more loudly or hold your microphone closer to your mouth, please? Let's see if we can do something there, please. Thank you. I think you're on mute again. We can't hear you at all.
Okay, it's
There
working
we are.
now.
That's it.
It is
Thank
working
you.
now.
Thank you so
Okay.
much.
I was saying that also going through the existing literature, we identify some model for admitting refugees in the third countries. And among these models is the so-called refugee or student refugee program that allow refugees to be relocated in Canada for the purpose of higher education. So alongside scholarship opportunities, this program operates through national and international partners such as the UNHCR, the IOM. And I will come back to this later because we started this program to suggest complementary pathways within the Western and Central Africa region. So following the scholarly knowledge, we also observe at regional level what is actually known and what can be done. This graph represents actually refugee population in Western and Central Africa. By observing the color code, the green corresponds to West Africa and the blue color corresponds to Central Africa. By observing this graph, we notice that almost 70% of refugees in Western and Central Africa are actually located in Central Africa. And less than 1% of these refugees has access to higher education against a number of 3% globally. And also evidence show that all countries in the region are affected by migration and the refugee crisis, either as a countries of origin or of destination. And in some countries like Chad and Niger, the refugee population has more than quadrupled over the last 2 decades. Always on the regional perspective, we identify in West and Central Africa 2 main economic communities. In West Africa, it is called the ECOWAS, and in Central Africa, it is called the ECAS. The protocol of these communities states that citizens of the communities have the right of entry, residence, and establishment in the member countries. So this community, by ensuring free population movement, establishment, and access to education, and can contribute to long-term solution for refugee relocation for the purpose of education within each region. I will then show you the country level analysis. Overall, for the country level analysis, we observe at each country level what are the conditions to access education, what are the challenges, conditions surrounding labor market, local laws towards refugees, and so on. So overall, the refugee access education at the same institution at national, but the conditions surrounding their access to education may differ compared to nationals, of course. Also, the national provision of higher education opportunities may be different. For example, when we consider a funding opportunity or scholarship program, it may differ depending on the location. And the legal framework could be also different. And also the country's own provision of higher education may be different depending on the higher education ecosystem of the country. So we map out these opportunities in 21 Western and Central African countries. But in this presentation, I'm going to show you only the case of Chad and of Cote d'Ivoire, because these 2 countries offer a very contrasting picture, a very contrasting and interesting picture. So regarding refugee population, in Chad, it is what we observe over the last 2 decades. We observe a rapid growth in refugee population, and most refugees in Chad are from Sudan and Central African Republic, which are in the neighborhood of Chad. Regarding age group, we observe that the refugee population between 0 and 17-year-olds account for 56% in Chad. Following this population profile, I will then discuss higher education ecosystem and access, scholarship challenges, and so on. So regarding the higher education ecosystem in Chad, it is made by public and private higher education institutions and TVET centers. Official figure for the Plan Intérimaire de l'Éducation and UNESCO show that accredited higher education institutions in Chad are in a number of 130, while TVET accredited centers are 43 in Chad. Refugee access to higher education then. In Chad, refugees access to higher education under the same condition as national at public institutions. But in private institutions, evidence show that the institution offer refugees a 50% discount on tuition fees, which release the economic burden on refugees in Chad. Regarding scholarship opportunity, we observe or identify in the report some opportunities that are available for refugees in Chad. Regarding challenges, we observe that most refugee camps in Chad are located near the Sudanese border. So the distance between the main refugee camps and the campuses is kind of important to reducing their access, which can be a challenge. We also observe some language barrier because in Chad, teaching language is English, is French and Arabic. So for refugee from Nigeria, for example, they face English speaking, which are, refugees from Nigeria who are English speaking refugees face linguistic issues. I will then discuss the case of Côte d'Ivoire. Compared to Chad, where we observe an increasing numbers in refugee population, in Côte d'Ivoire, we observe a decreasing refugee population over the last 2 decades. In terms of country of origin, most refugees in Côte d'Ivoire are from Liberia, which is an English-speaking country, and then from Central African Republic in Syria, which are not countries from the immediate neighborhood of Côte d'Ivoire. In terms of age group, while 0 to 17 years old refugees are most refugees in Chad, in Côte d'Ivoire, they represent 38% of the refugee population. Let me now discuss access to education and challenges in Côte d'Ivoire. The higher education in Côte d'Ivoire is constituted by public, private, and virtual higher education institutions and TVET centers. Official numbers indicate 332 accredited higher education, 332 accredited TVET centers against 51 accredited higher education institutions in Côte d'Ivoire. Regarding the access to the higher education system in Côte d'Ivoire, we noticed that refugees are treated as international students in Côte d'Ivoire, which is associated with higher fees. In terms of scholarship, we identify also some scholarship available for refugees in Côte d'Ivoire, and also a program which is called the DEAD Leadership for Africa program in Côte d'Ivoire. So this program is available for refugees residing in Côte d'Ivoire, but give them the opportunity to be relocated in a third country to access higher education. Challenges, most refugees in Côte d'Ivoire being from Liberia, which is an English-speaking country, they face linguistic barrier, of course, and financial barrier have also been identified for refugees with no access to scholarship. Following these country cases, I will discuss now what we call complementary pathways. Please let me recall here the first and second objective of this research, which is about identifying existing and potential complementary pathways in the region, and then assess where there is a scope to further develop pre-existing complementary pathways across Western and Central Africa. So we did not identify complementary pathways in the region, in Western Central Africa in 2021. So the research question for us has then become, where is developing then such program will be conducive? So by analyzing the student refugee program that relocated refugee students in Canada for the purpose of education, we observed that some conditions need to be fulfilled because we relocate a refugee to a country for the purpose of education. Among these conditions, we have the existence of a higher education ecosystem that is capable to absorb refugees, students in addition to national. We also observe that there need to be a local organization or a network of organizations, including a diaspora, that can help refugees with the integration in the host country. Thirdly, the responsiveness of the system, this can be captured through enrollment in higher education in the country. So because you don't want to relocate refugees in a third country where no one is accessing higher education. So the last characteristic is that the country's capacity to absorb educated refugees, giving them a long-term solution after education. So we find then quantitative process for each of these characteristics. And we use that quantitative process to develop a single indicator to classify the 21 countries of West and Central Africa into, according to the research question, what is it possible to develop complementary pathways in the region? By doing so, this is our result. I need to say that the method of doing this has been explained in the report, and it is easily available. So by doing this, you classify the countries, the 21 countries, into two main categories. And the first category is country presenting favorable indicator for the potential to develop complementary pathways through education. And when the color code here, the green corresponds to the first category. And when we observe the country in the green category, we see that they are countries from both Western and Central Africa. And they are also countries where English and French, also Arabic, are the teaching languages. So taking into account regional frameworks and this classification, we think it is actually possible to relocate refugees according to language, region, within the region for the purpose of higher education. I will then move to the overall assessment, and I will discuss some of the gaps we identify in the research. So overall, we noticed that in most Western and Central African countries, refugees access higher education under the same condition as national. The two exceptions we identified are Cote d'Ivoire, as I mentioned before, and Senegal. Some international scholarship programs are available in the respective countries of asylum within the region. Regional migration policy framework appear to be suitable for refugee resettlement within the region. Also, local authorities in most countries support graduate refugee students in their transition from school to work. And we have also identified for each country some challenges that can be mentioned in the report. In terms of gaps, in most Western and Central African countries, there is a kind of a lack of a list of accredited institutions. And the one we identify are the most recent one, but we are sure that that list will change over time. Also, we faced an issue relating to the number of university refugees, because if you have data on university refugees, you can use that data to predict the demand for higher education among refugee population. And we also noticed that there is a kind of systemic underinvestment in most higher education systems in Western and Central African countries. I will then discuss the recommendation. We believe that there is a need to create a robust data management system for the collection of baseline data regarding refugees and access to education, or regarding issue related to education. We also think that there's a need to identify and document good practices in the region, and to use these practices for advocacy in countries where the system is not working, or where refugees face issues to access higher education. And finally, by collecting qualitative data and interviewing refugees, we think that there's a need to communicate a lot about the opportunities and the access route to refugees in the respective country of asylum. I will stop here for this presentation, and thank you for your attention. Please, the report is available on ESSA's homepage and also at UNHCR. Thank you. Back to you, Maura.
Many thanks, Latte, for that detailed overview and very insightful presentation of the issue under discussion today. And we are honored to have with us today Nabila Umar Hassan, who is going to speak next. Nabila is a student with refugee status. She was born in the Central African Republic and was forced to flee her country in 2014 and was recognized as a refugee in Cameroon and has since undertaken a number of studies, further and higher education. Nabila, the floor is yours. Thank you for joining us today.
Alors, bonsoir à tous. Moi, c'est Oumar Hassan Nabila.
Good afternoon. I'm Nabila Oumar Hassan. I come from the Central African Republic, and I was a refugee in Cameroon. Talking about myself, I used to live in the Republic of Central Africa, and because of problems, I had to flee my country to seek refuge in Cameroon. Before I arrived to Cameroon, things were complicated in terms of education because at sometimes I had some problems with parents, relatives, family, when it comes to the perception of education in in Islam, because I happen to be a Muslim. So, somehow I had to drop off studying because my family didn't want me to, so we had to flee from Central Africa and go to Cameroon, and there I was able to carry on studying in spite of a few ups and downs with my relatives and family. So in Cameroon I started studying. I obtained a BTS in organizational communication. And then during my other years of education, I had problems with family, with studies, marriage, etc. I didn't want to. All I wanted was to be able to work, to study, to become somebody interesting at all. So with a lot of difficulties, I was able to study further and obtain my licence, my bachelor's degree, but at the same time I had some issues because my brother, who was funding my study, couldn't fund my studies anymore because he had to support my family. So I had to stop at that level, bachelor's level, and the following year I was able to apply for a scholarship. I was lucky enough to be admitted to a scholarship. But unfortunately, there was no funding for the master's level because you had to start from the first to the third year. For me, staying at home and do nothing was something which I could not do. So I wanted to start from scratch again because I had the benefit of my previous experience. So I started another BT.
Où je commençais mon BTS en ressources humaines, j'ai eu l'opportunité.
And I got a scholarship.
L'université de Clermont pour la bourse, par rapport à la bourse. La chance que j'ai eue, c'est que j'avais déjà
get a scholarship. I already had my bachelor's degree. I had all the necessary documents. I had the refugee status. So I was lucky to have that, so I could be eligible for the scholarship. So thanks to the support of several people, I tried my luck, so to say, and it was very difficult at the beginning because there were several applicants from several countries, and I was lucky enough to be the only girl who was admitted in Cameroon. This is how everything started with my studies. The university approached me, and we agreed on the arrangements for travel, etc. It was quite complicated to know that to my relatives and parents because my parents were very strict, and I had to tell them that I was going to travel alone to study abroad. It was difficult, so I was afraid to tell them, but everything went well at the end of the day. And we started all the administrative arrangements. It was somehow or quite complicated because you had to arrange things with the embassy, and the replies from the embassy took a long time. And when it came to the refund or the paying of the airfares. It was difficult because the replies were slow, but eventually I got my visa and was lucky enough to land here in France. Once I arrived here in France, well, things were difficult at the beginning because when I arrived, it was already chilly. Where I come from, we have a temperature of 30 to 40 degrees, so I really had to get used to 20 or 10 degrees. It was difficult, really. And starting school was also complicated because we're talking about a completely different world, the way lessons are given. I had to catch up 3 years in one because the French constitution I did not know, and some political books I really had difficulties getting used to. But now things are going well. I'm getting used to things. Everything goes well, and I was lucky enough to have people who have supported me through that pathway. In terms of scholarship, it meant a lot to me, really a lot, I must say. It gave me the peace of mind to be able to study without thinking or fearing that my family could force me to marry from one day to another. So I had that stability, which I didn't have in Cameroon because I was at home with my family. There are things that I could do and could not do. There was the daily routine, etc. And I found an internship, and my family refused because it was said that it's not all right for a Muslim woman to be on the road when you start working, or when you go home or go back home late at 6 or 7 in the evening. It's late. So I had opportunities for internships, but I couldn't do that because my parents said no. And here I do have that stability, that peace of mind. I'm able to study, to work. I can do an internship without having to worry about somebody telling me that what I'm doing is pointless. So this scholarship, honestly, is a great opportunity for me, if I may say so. I'm not the only one. There are many of us. I know quite a few people like me who would like to pursue further education, and they are not that fortunate. But I was fortunate enough to be able to take part and to study. I really don't know how to thank those who supported me throughout. This scholarship means a lot to me because for the moment I'm at Clermont University doing a master's in information and communication. Things are going well. I want to write my thesis. I'll start in the first year and finish during the second year, and my thesis will be on humanitarian communication. And perhaps I can talk about complementary pathways for refugees, because as a refugee, I think I'm best placed to understand some things. And when I'm finished, I would really like to work in the humanitarian sector. Because I think that a refugee is really best placed to understand their friends and counterparts. And I think there's a lot I can do. There's a lot to do to help and support people. You're not born a refugee. I want to say that to people. And if you're a refugee, it doesn't mean that you've lost everything and you cannot do anything, because I'm a good example. I had to overcome many obstacles and problems, but I made it. And if I did, I think that most can. And if I complete my thesis, if I can write my thesis on complementary pathways, maybe I'll send it to UNHCR. And if pathways could be available to more people, because there are many refugees who would like to but don't have opportunities. There are many smart people around but who do not have opportunities. If complementary pathways could be extended to many more people than just myself, it would be very good. So that's what I had to say. Thank you so much.
Nabila, thank you so much for sharing your inspiring story. And we truly look forward to watching where you'll go next, because we can definitely see that this is a person that needs to be followed through, because you will be doing great things. And truly, there are so many others who have that potential and yet still don't have those opportunities, as hard fought as they are. And that's a very important reason why it is that we wanted to bring this particular report to a wider audience today. So thank you so much for that, Nabila. Next, I'm going to hand the floor over to Dr. Pauline ESSA, who is with Education in Sub Saharan Africa. And she will be moderating the Q&A now. And she is the Director of Research and Insight at ESSA, where she spearheads the generation of evidence and data for improving tertiary education in Sub-Saharan Africa. We coincided at the University of Cambridge a few years ago, and there she was instrumental in establishing and managing the flagship multidisciplinary Cambridge Africa program. And I'm very happy to hand the floor over to you, Pauline, and do please continue asking your questions in the chat. That is where Pauline will be taking her inspiration from. Thank you so much. Over to you, Pauline.
Thank you very much, Moira. It's a pleasure to be part of this program today. And thank you so much to Lucy, Ben, Moira, yourself, and Latte and Nabila for getting us to this stage. So yes, my work here today is to really encourage all our participants to take part in this discussion. I mean, you've heard the report from Latte, and I should say that was months of painstaking work trying to find data and evidence in West and Central Africa, not an easy task. And my appreciation goes to Michael Kinesley, who worked with us on this, as well as Krista Sampson from ESSA for all the work that we've done to get this report out and to try and bring about change. And this is not just a report. Honestly, as you've heard from Nabila, we're talking about human beings, how the access to information and evidence about what's happening in terms of investment in tertiary education or policies that enable education for young people, men and women in the region, for ordinaries, but more especially for people from marginalized groups who find it even more challenging to access education. And yet education is the foundation for making sure that each and every one of these young people can contribute to society long term, in the countries where they were born, in the countries where they've been given secondary asylum or been given a place to stay, but also a third country where they may be able to access education and to improve their lives and those of their families. So I want this to be taken as seriously as we can in terms of how we can use the evidence from the report to bring about long-term change through engagement with different partners and stakeholders. So having heard what you've heard from Latte's brilliant presentation and Nabila's personal experience of the challenges, but also the opportunities, how are we going to use the recommendations and what we've heard today to actually improve the situation for young refugees in West and Central Africa? And I'm so pleased to see that we've had people joining from all over the world today. Thank you for having the interest in this subject and for taking time to join us. As indicated earlier, we will summarize the discussions from today to share with you all along with the slides. So I think the floor is open now for us all in the next 30 minutes to discuss how we can use this report in an effective way. And I'll be looking through the charts to pick out the questions that are coming through and to call on all our participants. So we've got people from UNHCR, from ESSA on the program today to help respond to the questions and to take part in the discussion. So the floor is open. I saw that there was a question from a member of the audience asking how connected, I guess, the funders and policymakers are in terms of supporting refugees in this space. So I wonder whether Ben or Latte would like to respond, and I'm happy to contribute as well as someone who was involved in the research. Sorry, Ben, would you want to?
Sorry.
Thank you.
I was just trying to unmute. I was having a few technical problems. Sorry, could you repeat the question, Pauline? Thank you.
So the question was, yeah, how are funders, the policymakers, those involved in supporting refugees, collaborating or engaging to make sure that there is more education for young people?
I think actually for this, to answer the question in relation to education, I'm actually going to pass that one over to Charlotte, if that's okay.
Yeah, sure. Charlotte, the floor is yours, please. And please introduce yourself because the audience don't know. Thank you.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can, Charlotte. Thank you.
Okay, thanks, Pauline. Hi, everyone. So my name is Charlotte Berquin, and I'm working for UNHCR Regional Bureau for Western Central Africa. I'm leading the education unit. Can you just repeat the question, and I will answer in French, if it's okay.
Yes, sure. So there's a question that has come through asking how UNHCR is engaging with policymakers and funders to better support education for refugees, or whether and how, yeah.
Oui. Alors, il y a un travail important qui est effectivement mené par le HCR sur
some important work is carried out by HCR on access to refugees to higher education. First of all, there's a lot of advocacy work carried out with the ministries of education in host countries where refugees are, because there are several countries in the region where refugees cannot access public universities under the same terms as the nationals of those countries, unfortunately. So we carried advocacy work so that refugee students are on an equal footing with the nationals and can access universities in their host countries and public universities under the same conditions as nationals. So that's number one. Number two in our engagements is all the work we carry out with universities directly in host countries so that they can undertake to give scholarships to refugee students so they can access education. This we do directly with host country universities, but also through some innovative arrangements. We do that taking into account distance learning. For example, the Agence Universitaire de la Francophonie works with several universities in the region which offer distance learning curricula at master's level or bachelor's level, so that these students can access that education. And then the whole thing which was illustrated by Nabili, which is the complementary pathways through university or university corridors, where third countries universities pledge working with foundations or the private sector to provide scholarships so that students in host countries in the region can study overseas, Europe, Canada, the United States, and also other countries of the regions. In Ghana, for example, there are several universities through a scholarship program funded by Masters Cancer Foundation, receive students from other countries of the region who study for their master's degree or bachelor's degree in Ghana. What we want to do is to make everyone aware of what they can do, universities, Ministry of Education, but also the private sectors, sector foundations, etc., so that they can improve the existing scholarship programs, the existing complementary pathways, the existing education policies in the asylum or host countries, so that higher education is more accessible for refugees in their host countries or in third countries. Thank you. Over to you, Pauline. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Charlotte, for that detailed explanation. I hope it answers the question that came through. So there's a lot being done, a lot more that we need to do. And from our research, it's clear that more resource is needed in terms of investment. And it's not something that, say, the UNHCR can be expected to do on their own. So we really are calling on potential investors in this space. There's so much that can be done. As you heard from Latte's presentation, access to tertiary education for young refugees in West and Central Africa is currently 1%. Global average currently now stands at 5%. When we were doing the research, it was 3%. It's now increased to 5%. West and Central Africa needs to catch up. And UNHCR's goal is that by 2030, we should be at 15% access. So there's a long way to go and very little time. So it is an urgent situation, and we need to do our best to accelerate the progress that is being made. And I think from the research that we've conducted as well, there are opportunities for speeding up this process and expanding access. And so we're here to hear your ideas, to network, to bring in more partners, to engage with the UNHCR. ESSA is here to support any data gathering and evidence as well that is needed, and for us to continue to move the dial upwards in terms of percentage access. Thank you, Charlotte. There's another question in there about EdTech and how TVET and EdTech and how that could be a useful route for educating young people and to improve the educational status as well. So I don't know if Charlotte, you had anything to say about that. Otherwise, we can also bring in Latte and anyone who wants to respond to EdTech. Thank you.
Peut-être je peux juste avant que Well, before giving the floor to Latte, who will certainly complement what I'm going to say, most probably. I said before that indeed remote learning, which implies to have, having access to connectivity, to devices, is one of the means to improve access of student refugees to higher education. But bear in mind that for the moment, this is still very limited and difficult. Why? Because most of the refugees, especially in West and Central Africa, are in regions where very often they don't have access to electricity, let alone internet, computers. So it's very, very difficult to have a regular access, sufficiently regular access to be able to really have a remote delivery of a higher quality education in the long run. But the UNHCR works with some refugee camps, with some countries, in order to bring this connectivity and make sure that those students that cannot go to the big cities, that cannot go physically to the university campus, to make sure that these students can indeed have access to a remote education. So we have a partnership also with the Agence Universitaire de la Francophonie in the region, which I spoke of before. This allows students to have access to education when they have university or higher education curricula, they have access to the French-speaking campus of the association, which allows these students to have access also to the devices, to the internet connection, etc. But it's a huge challenge, and it still is a huge challenge. And it was very important for us and it is very important for us to be able to work on those different levels if we really want to improve refugee students' access to education, especially remotely. There are lots of initiatives being put in place in Africa with, for instance, the virtual universities where you have all these remote curricula, but in parallel, it's absolutely essential that the ministries of education invest in digital infrastructure, including in the refugee camps, in the areas where refugee populations are concentrated. And it's important also to make sure that all students, including the refugee students, are trained in digital skills so that they can have access to this education, because of course you need digital skills. This means also that in the curricula at the, the primary school level or secondary level, that needs to be integrated, and the schools where you host, where you have refugee students or pupils, this needs to be taken into account. To make it short, I think that there are huge opportunities and linkages to be made by leveraging these new digital tools and communication tools and remote learning and remote education. But to that end, we need to have a commitment from the countries, from the ministries of education, for the different partners, from the private sector, so as to make sure that everyone has the same opportunity to have access to these services. Pauline, over to you.
Thank you very much, Charlotte. Really helpful hearing these directly from those of you working on this on a daily basis. And I hope that answers some of the questions that came through. Given the comprehensive response, I don't know if Lati wants to come in, otherwise he could pick another one. There's a question asking if we can explain the differences that have come through in terms of access in Chad compared to Cote d'Ivoire. So I know Latte presented some of the highlights of findings from their report. But again, I can say based on what we were finding, Chad, for example, seems to have had a much longer time and experience of dealing with an influx of refugees. And so it makes sense that they've found creative ways of adapting to the situation. And yes, that was the highest ranking we could find in terms of readiness for receiving refugees as a third complementary way of providing education. But Latte, do you want to come in and provide a bit more meat on the bones? Thank you. Latte, if you're speaking, you're on mute. Latte, you're still on mute if you're responding.
Thank you, Pauline. I could not unmute myself. Anyway, yes, to come back to the questions, I guess the history of Chad and the way that refugee population have been increasing in Chad over the last 2 decades is a perfect explanation of why they have specific measure to provide access to higher education to more refugees, and specifically on the case of private institution offering refugees a 50%, discount on tuition fees. The same observation appear in Cameroon, but in Cote d'Ivoire, I guess it is also about the country's understanding of how to deal with refugee situations, how they believe that it is a priority to them or not. So that is what we observe in the country. So how the people will be dealing with this in the future? Yes, we hope that this work and truth advocacy, that every single country in the region, Western and Central Africa, will be doing something more, something better about the refugee situations. We also have in the chat a question regarding documentation for refugees to access education in the host countries. Yes, this is also among the challenges we identify in the region. By talking to refugees, to a refugee in Ghana, she clearly mentioned that she wanted to have access to higher education, but she does not have the documentation at that time because his baccalaureate was in Cote d'Ivoire and while she is a refugee in Ghana. But it is also difficult to go back to Cote d'Ivoire to find your baccalaureate and come back to Ghana to access higher education. So these issues are there, and we believe that countries and specific country policy will be developed to provide more access to refugees. And we also think that there's a lot to do in terms of advocacy so that people, decision makers, believe or think that it is a priority, or the refugee issue is a priority in the region. I guess that's it for me, Pauline.
Thank you, Latte. And colleagues from UNHCR, if you want to jump in, please do at any time. There's another question here in relation to funding for education, for refugees education, and whether we might think about bringing together scholarship providers to inform them about the findings and try and get them on board. And I should say that ESSA is directly involved in this space in terms of listening to young people from Africa and trying to amplify their voices. Many are calling for scholarships even when they're in their own countries to be able to access education. And the situation is far worse for refugee students. I know UNHCR has a fantastic website that provides opportunities or highlights scholarship opportunities for refugees. And maybe a link can be put in the chat before the end of the event. And ESSA also has a scholarships hub that highlights scholarship opportunities for young people from Sub Saharan Africa in general. We have tried to bring together scholarship providers to try and build a community of practice, to share findings of what's working well in the scholarship space, evidence of good practice and what can be adapted. But maybe there's a need for a more focused conversation on refugee access. And I wonder if I can bring someone from UNHCR, maybe Ben, or to see if there are any discussions ongoing with the big scholarship finders or if providers, or if we can pool our forces together and try and engage with them. Ben or
Thanks,
Charlotte?
Pauline. Yeah, I mean, I'm going to let Charlotte answer that in terms of what's happening right now, but I certainly think that in terms of pooling resources and pooling knowledge towards a common cause, it makes complete sense. I think just touching on that also, somebody raised I think Latte might have touched upon it, someone raised the issue of equivalencies in relation to qualifications and diploma. That's another area that we really need to, and perhaps this is where data can come in a bit, where we need to understand where the equivalencies apply, where they were, so that we have a kind of a resource where we can access this information and understand where there may or may not be issues around equivalencies in terms of accessing some of these initiatives as well. I think there's a real need in general just to try and pull together information that is immediately accessible. And I know it is, as you pointed out, Pauline, it's been done in many different under many different guises in different areas, and trying to kind of pull this together, which indeed was essentially one of the recommendations that the report found as well, in order to make it easier for refugees to access. And I'm just thinking, going back to Nabila's really incredible testimony, I think having access to that sort of level of information would have probably been extremely helpful for her from the very beginning. Unfortunately, she's found her way and done fantastically, but there's no doubt that there could be things, and it might be interesting to hear from Nabila on this as well. What would have made things easier for her during that journey? What would have made things easier for her and could make things easier for other refugees in that situation? Because I think they are the people that we are talking about here, and that's what we want to do our best to ensure that they are able to access these initiatives. Over.
Thank you very much, Ben. Nabila, do you want to respond to that? Maybe share a bit more on what other refugees in your situation
Oui,
perhaps
bien
would
sûr.
find useful?
Et je me ferai un plaisir de vous répondre.
Yes, of course, if you allow me. So, to be honest, it's very, very important to do something to this effect, because, I mean, we're talking here about education for all, but myself, I would really call for perhaps a specific focus on girls. It's education for girls. Many girls want to study, but maybe they did not go against their families like I did to go on with their studies. And it's true that for many of us, we have a language problems in the Central African Republic, before and after the war. the context was pretty harsh for us. So girls, a focus on girls, a focus on language, and to make it easier, well, perhaps if I take the example of Cameroon, where I come from, you have excellent universities in Cameroon, but we don't have access to it for some reason to them. I don't know if we can perhaps would it be possible to work with universities to make sure that universities do welcome refugees? I was welcome in France. Could we talk to these African universities to say, please, welcome those refugee students, make it easier for them to have access to education? And can we also perhaps extend these complementary paths at international level? Because many of refugees have a degree and they would have the possibility to go on with their education, but they can't for some reason. I don't know if I'm answering your question really, Ben, or if I need to be more specific.
No, I think that's fine, Nabila. Thank you very much. I mean, I was you gave some really interesting insights into what would be most helpful to think about in terms of access for refugees. I was thinking also about the mechanisms that you might have benefited from. What would have made your journey easier in terms of access to information, in terms of you know, how to access a certain scholarship, how to access certain programs? Is there anything there that you think might have been might be useful to promote or to improve for other refugees in that situation? Over.
Nabila, are you able to shed any more light?
I'm here. Sorry. I'm at school, so I have to move from one classroom to another because there are people who are coming in and out. So sorry. I'm here. Can you please ask your question once again, because I was moving about, Ben? Can you ask your question once again?
Français cette fois, Nabila, comme ça.
This time I'm going to do it in French, Nabila. So the interpreter can take a break. Not really, because the interpreter still has to interpret Ben now. So I was asking a question about mechanisms that we can put in place. Is there a mechanism perhaps that we could have put in place that would have made it easier for you to have access to information, on specific programs, to have access to scholarships, or something else? What would be a mechanism that we could implement that would have made it easier for you perhaps in your journey, and that could make it easier for other refugees? Am I clear enough? Yes, thank you very much. Well, you know, to be honest, there's something that I find very, very important, but for me, the main difficulty was in a way, being a woman and being of my religion. You know, you're a woman, you're a Muslim woman, and you have to face the pressure where people are telling you have to get married and education is not important. I don't agree with that at all. I always think that women and Muslim girls have the right to have an education, to get an education. Now, this was a huge impediment for me, and I know that many women are faced with that challenge. Now, at international level, I know that there are programs in order to value education for all, but it's true that we have a lack of information. As regards scholarships, I'm not sure, but I couldn't see anything about it. They're not visible enough, those scholarship programs. And, you know, we don't get any information on scholarships. And then you've got people who have a degree. You've got people who could apply to certain programs, but they ask, no, you have to have a degree from 2021, 2017, 2016, and you've got perhaps somebody who's got a degree from before or from after, and though these people cannot follow or register in those programs. So that's an obstacle as well. And in the field, in terms of scholarship, if you allow me, there's also something to be done at the administrative level. That was complicated. First of all, a refugee passport is not something that is really easily recognized. And of course, I was with another person coming from Niger. Our passport was not recognized. The day I had to travel to France, my journey was almost canceled because the authorities did not recognize my passport. They told me that it was illegal. So I had to wait hours and hours before, you know, they let me go into the boarding area. And I was not the only one. I was with somebody else who had the same problem. And when I came to France, same thing. I had to wait 10, 20, 40 minutes because nobody knew my my passport or my documentation. So that's a huge problem. And there's a language barrier. Many refugees want to go on with their studies, want to study, but there's this linguistic barrier, this challenge. So that's complicated. In terms of access, it's complicated. For instance, the access to scholarship. When I applied for the scholarship in France, it was very limited to Niger, for instance. Whereas outside of Niger, there are many countries that would have a huge refugee population. Can you open up, or can those programs be opened up to other countries? I don't know why the program started being focused only to Niger, and then they opened the program to Chad and Cameroon, thank goodness. And I know that there was the same procedure that was again relaunched this year, but again, focused and limited to Niger. Now, I was with another girl who was brilliant. If they had another spot for the scholarship, I think she would have been selected as well, with or without me. I don't know. Maybe she would have been a better candidate. I don't know. But this is a little bit the problem, access, really.
Merci beaucoup.
Une dernière petite chose.
Oui.
Je ne sais pas s'il peut y avoir une info, si on peut informer les universités, peut-être les universités qui sont en Afrique, que ce soit au Cameroun. Il y a de très prestigieuses universités étant là-bas. Si vraiment...
Prestigious universities in Africa as well, in Cameroon. It's not only in France or other countries, but in Cameroon, in some African countries, there could be scholarships for some students. So perhaps some institutions could try and offer scholarship for those in Ghana, in Senegal. So a scholarship should not necessarily be in the EU. There are universities in Africa which have very good education as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nabila. I think you brought all the words and the text we put in our report to life with your contributions and your personal experiences, because these are some of the recommendations we were making from the findings. Information is not always available, and when it is, it's not always very visible. The policy may be available or not, and if it is, it's not necessarily being implemented in these countries. And I think we really are onto something. If we can try and generate the resources needed to focus on complementary pathways in West and Central Africa, that might enable us to scale up, because it takes a lot more to send people abroad. So maybe focusing on the region, engaging with university education providers to make way for refugees to be able to access these opportunities better. As you're saying, degrees, I mean, when you got them matters, and how can we make more provision to make your lives a bit easier? It really has touched my heart in terms of what you shared with us, and I'm sure many of the participants today feel your pain, and we appreciate the effort it's taken for you to get where you are, and I hope, and I'm sure you'll be an inspiration for many other refugees and non-refugees to aspire to follow in your shoes and make great out of life and the challenges thrown at them. In the interest of time, I'm afraid there are more questions coming in, but we said we'd finish on time. And so we will leave it at this point. Please feel free to email us, UNHCR, ESSA, NORRAG, with any further contributions, suggestions, and clearly there's more to be discussed, and we're hoping to carry on with this work. And so watch out for this space. We'll keep in touch with you all. I will hand over to Moira to finish us off, and thank you all so much for your questions, for your comments, for spurring us on to keep doing this work. And ESSA will be on standby to support UNHCR and all other partners in whatever we can do next. Thank you. Back to you, Moira. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Pauline, and everyone who contributed answers to those extremely interesting questions contributed by our audience. And I think the questions as well as the answers demonstrate yet again the importance of this topic, the passions that are brought to, number one, being educated and making sure that you can be educated in the way that Nabila has shown in her experience, and also to all of those of us who are working towards making the most of all educational opportunities for all, and making sure that those educational opportunities are inclusive and also quality, as is said in the ambition of Sustainable Development Goal 4. Nabila specifically called for more opportunities for girls and women. And I've just dropped into the chat a video of an event that we organized with Switzerland for UNHCR, the Graduate Institute, Giving Women and the Women Business Society. That video is available on our website, and we would invite you all to watch that and also take any actions that are available to you to increase and improve this absolutely critical issue, as so much more eloquently put by Nabila than I could ever say. So the event today was really to shine a spotlight on the fact that whilst SDG 4 expresses this ambition of ensuring inclusive, quality and equitable education, we still are facing significant issues. Refugees and internally displaced people are not only poorly represented in education, the conditions surrounding their access to higher and further education, we do know, are more excluding than including. And the work of this particular report in highlighting what work is being done and what more could be done in partnership with UNHCR in West Africa is an absolutely critical piece to the puzzle in making sure that we can improve the situation and that we can actually make the difference that is needed in those girls, women, and boys and men's lives. So thank you all so much for joining us today. It has been absolutely inspiring for all of us here today. And we look forward to seeing you at the next set of events that we are working on. You will, at the end of this event, you will receive a follow-up email, not immediately, with the video recordings and events highlights, but you will sooner than that receive an evaluation form so that you'll be able to tell us what it is that we did well, what it is you think we could improve for the next time. And again, encourage you to join the NORRAG network. You will find the links in the chat now. This is a project that is related to the theme of today. We are looking at the role of quality education in building durable, just and sustainable peace. If anybody is interested in contributing, there are email addresses on the screen and you'll find more information about that on our website. And also the webinar, Women in Leadership in Education, Global Perspectives, which is co-hosted by ESSA, the International Association of Universities, and the European Women's Rectors Association. And there is the Twitter handle there for more developments if you would like to know more about that event. And it is only left for me to say thank you all for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you again soon. Goodbye.